Olivia Sterling stopped dead in the hallway. She heard something impossible. It was her grandmother's voice, actually saying a complete sentence. For the first time in 4 years, the words were clear, albeit weak. "I want to hear the end of the story." Olivia felt the world tilt on its axis. Her legs trembled, her heart hammered in her chest. Because that voice she hadn't heard in 1,460 days, was the voice of Grandma Carol, her 78-year-old grandmother, the woman who had been a literature professor. If this story resonates with you in any way, if you feel there's someone in your life who has lost their voice, literally or figuratively, stay with us. Because what you're about to hear will change the way you see the people around you. Olivia owned the largest chain of bookstores in the United States. The irony: she sold millions of books every year, millions of words packaged in paper, more than 200 bookstores across the country, employees who admired her, awards from the publishing industry, interviews in business magazines where she spoke of the power of reading. But she couldn't hear a single word from her own grandmother. Olivia's estate covered several acres in one of the most exclusive areas of the city. It had a personal library with more than 10,000 books, first editions, signed manuscripts, rare copies that collectors would kill for. But none of those books had been read aloud to Grandma Carol since the stroke. Grandma Carol's room was in the east wing of the estate. It was spacious, luminous, with windows overlooking a rose garden that she herself had planted 30 years ago. It had a state-of-the-art medical bed, vital sign monitors, a nurse available 24 hours a day, everything money could buy. But money couldn't buy words. The stroke came without warning, a Tuesday in October, 4 years ago. Grandma Carol was in the garden, pruning her roses, when she felt a sharp pain in her head. She collapsed to the ground. She was found 30 minutes later. The doctors said she was lucky to be alive, lucky that the damage wasn't greater. But luck comes at a price, and the price that Grandma Carol paid was her voice. Broca's aphasia, that's what they called it, a condition where the brain understands everything but can't form words. Grandma Carol could hear perfectly. She could understand every conversation. She could feel every emotion. But when she opened her mouth to speak, only meaningless sounds came out, broken syllables, frustrated attempt, tears of helplessness. The neurologists explained that Broca's area, located in the left frontal lobe, had suffered severe damage during the stroke. This area is responsible for language production. Without it functioning correctly, the brain can understand the words but can't organize them to speak. It's like having a library full of books, but with all the doors locked. The books are there, the words are there, but there's no way to get them out. Grandma Carol, before the stroke, was an extraordinary woman. She had taught literature at the university for 4 decades. Her students remembered her for her passion when reciting poetry. She could recite Robert Frost from memory for hours. She could bring an entire auditorium to tears with her interpretation of Stopping by Woods on a Snowy Evening. Her voice was her most prized instrument, and the stroke had stolen it from her. Olivia remembered the first month after the stroke. She remembered how her grandmother tried to speak, and only a guttural moan came out. She remembered how Grandma Carol cried in frustration when she couldn't even say her own name. She remembered how she herself cried in the bathroom of her office, hidden from her employees, wondering why the universe had taken away the person she loved most without even killing her, because that was the worst part. Grandma Carol was alive. She was there. Her eyes were still the same brown eyes that Olivia remembered from her childhood. Her smile was still the same smile, but her voice, the voice that had sung her lullabies, the voice that had read her stories before bed, the voice that had said "I love you" thousands of times, that voice no longer existed. Olivia hired the best specialists, speech therapists from around the country, neurologists from Europe, experimental therapists from Asia, She spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on treatments that promised miracles. None of them worked. After 2 years of failed attempts, the last specialist told her the truth. Ms. Sterling, your grandmother's broca's area is severely damaged. The probability that she'll regain functional speech is less than 3%. I recommend that you accept the situation and focus on quality of life, not on recovery. Olivia heard those words, and something died inside her. It wasn't hope. It was something worse. It was presence. From that day on, Olivia started working more. She came home later. She visited her grandmother for only 10 minutes a day, sometimes less, sometimes not at all. It wasn't that she didn't love her. She loved her with all her soul. But every time she looked at Grandma Carol, every time she saw those eyes that begged to be understood, every time she heard those sounds that tried to be words, Olivia felt a pain so deep that she couldn't bear it. So she fled. She fled to her office. She fled to her meetings. She fled to her numbers and her graphs and her sales projections. She fled to anywhere where she didn't have to face her mother's silence. And then came Hope. Hope Miller was 52 years old when she was hired 6 months ago. She came from a small town in rural America, Harmony Creek, a town of 3,000 residents where the houses were modest and the streets were quiet. A town where grandmothers still told stories around the fireplace and children fell asleep listening to tales of mermaids and fishermen. Hope had left her town at 30, after her husband died in a construction accident. She had no children, no savings. She only had her hands to work and a worn book that her grandmother had passed down to her. That book was her most treasured possession. It was a hardcover notebook with stories handwritten by her grandmother more than 50 years ago. The pages were yellowed, and some were falling apart, but Hope took care of it as if it were gold, because in those pages were the voices of all the women in her family, the stories they had told from generation to generation. Hope didn't come with glowing recommendations. She had no experience in mansions. She was just a small-town woman who knew how to clean, cook, and do her job without being a bother. Olivia interviewed her for 5 minutes, asked her 2 questions, told her the salary, and pointed out the location of the maids' quarters. To Olivia, Hope was just another employee, number 8 in 4 years. None of them lasted long. None of them could stand the heavy atmosphere of a house where an elderly woman moaned incomprehensible sounds at all hours. None of them wanted to wipe away Grandma Carol's tears of frustration when she couldn't communicate that she was thirsty or that something hurt. But Hope was different. Although Olivia didn't know it yet, the voice Olivia heard in the hallway wasn't from the television. It was real. Someone in that house was talking, and that someone was her mother. Olivia walked toward Grandma Carol's room, her heart beating so hard she could hear it in her ears. The door was ajar. A soft light streamed through the window, bathing everything in a golden late afternoon glow. And then she saw the scene. Hope was sitting in a chair next to Grandma Carol's bed. She held an old book in her hands, a book with a worn cover and yellowed pages, and she was reading aloud in a soft, melodic voice, as if she was singing. But that wasn't what took Olivia's breath away. What took Olivia's breath away was her mother. Grandma Carol was sitting up in bed, her eyes gleaming with a smile that Olivia hadn't seen in 4 years, and her lips were moving. Not with senseless sounds, with words that followed the rhythm of the story, words that completed Hope's sentences. It was like seeing a ghost. It was like seeing someone return from the dead. It was like witnessing a miracle that the doctors had said was impossible. Olivia stood there, paralyzed, unable to move, unable to speak. Tears began to fall down her cheeks uncontrollably. And then Hope reached the end of a paragraph and stopped. And Grandma Carol said those words, the words that Olivia would never forget. "I want to hear the end of the story. A complete sentence. Subject, verb, object. 10 words. 10 words that were worth more than all the millions Olivia had in the bank. 10 words that proved that her mother was still there, that her voice was still there, that she just needed the right path to come out. Olivia took a step back. She didn't want to interrupt. She didn't want to break the spell. She stayed in the hallway listening, crying silently while Hope continued reading, and Grandma Carol continued murmuring words along with her. That night, Olivia didn't sleep. She stayed in her study, staring out the window, trying to process what she had seen. 4 years of specialists, 4 years of expensive treatments, 4 years of lost hope, and a housekeeper, with an old book, had achieved what no one else could. How was it possible? What had Hope done that the best doctors in the world hadn't thought of? Olivia needed to know, but she didn't dare ask. Not yet. First, she needed to observe. The next day, Olivia didn't go to work. She stayed home. She observed. Hope arrived at 7 in the morning, as usual, cleaned the kitchen, prepared breakfast, did the laundry, did everything a housekeeper does. But at 4 in the afternoon, something changed. Hope stopped what she was doing, went to her room, came out with the same old book from yesterday, and walked toward Grandma Carol's room. Olivia followed her silently, keeping her distance. She saw Hope enter the room. She saw her sit down next to the bed. She saw her open the book to a page marked with a piece of red cloth, and she saw Grandma Carol, who had been lying down with her eyes closed, sit up immediately, as if she knew it was time, as if she had been waiting for that moment all day. "Good afternoon, Grandma Carol," Hope said in her soft voice. "Today, we're going to continue where we left off. Remember the story of the fisherman and the mermaid?" Grandma Carol nodded. And then she did something that left Olivia speechless. She opened her mouth and said, "The fisherman was afraid." 3 words, spoken with effort, with pauses between each one, but spoken clearly, comprehensively. "Very good, Grandma Carol," Hope said with a huge smile. The fisherman was afraid because he had never seen such a beautiful mermaid, and he wondered if she was real or if she was a dream. Olivia watched for an hour. She saw Hope read short paragraphs and then wait. She saw Grandma Carol try to repeat phrases. Sometimes she succeeded. Sometimes only a murmur came out. But Hope never got frustrated, never got impatient. She always smiled and said, "Very good," or "almost got it," or "let's try again." It was like watching a therapy session, but it wasn't formal therapy. There were no machines. There were no scientific exercises, just a woman reading stories and another woman trying to say them. That night, Olivia searched Hope's room while she was having dinner. What she found took her breath away. A notebook, a spiral notebook with a blue cover, worn from use. On the first page, in careful handwriting written in pencil, it said, "Grandma Carol's Progress," below, in smaller letters, "so that one day she can tell her own stories." Olivia opened the notebook with trembling hands. What she found left her speechless. The following pages were filled with notes, dates, words, observations. Each entry was written with the same care, as if each word were important, because to Hope, each word was. Week 1, only sounds, no attempt at words. But her eyes light up when I read. Week 3 tried to say water, came out as wa-ah, progress. Week 6 said mommy. When I finished a story about a mother and her daughter, I cried. Week 10, 2-word phrases, more stories. Again, the cat. Week 16, today she said a 4-word phrase. I like that part. Olivia turned the pages with trembling hands. Each week was documented, each small advance recorded, each word noted, as if it were treasure. And there was something else. At the end of the notebook, there was a section titled Stories That Work Best. Love stories, Grandma Carol smiles more, tries more words, family stories. Sometimes she cries, but then she talks more. Stories with happy endings. She repeats them with me. Robert Frost poetry, only this one. When I read Stopping by Woods on a Snowy Evening, her eyes shine differently. I think she remembers it from before. Today, she tried to say, whose woods these are I think I know. Only came out woo-oo I know. But she tried. That's what matters. Olivia turned the pages, tears falling onto the paper. There were more notes. Much more. Week 20. Today, Grandma Carol cried when I finished the story of the little boy who found his lost mother. I think the story reminded her of something. I asked her if she was okay. She nodded, then tried to say something. I heard, Mia. I think she meant Hija Mia. My daughter, I'm not sure, but I think she was thinking of Olivia. Week 22. Grandma Carol asked me to repeat a story, not with words, with gestures. She pointed to the book and then made a circle with her finger. She wanted me to repeat it. That's communication, that's progress. Even if they're not words, it's communication. Hope had studied Grandma Carol as if she were a research project. She had identified patterns. She had found what kind of stories generated the most response. She had developed her own method without any medical training, based only on observation and love. Olivia closed the notebook. She put it back where she found it and left the room with a broken heart. Not broken from sadness, broken from shame. She was the daughter. She was the owner of a chain of bookstores. She had access to all the books in the world. And it hadn't occurred to her to read to her own mother. Hope, a housekeeper with a minimum wage salary, had thought of something so simple and so powerful that all the specialists had ignored. If this story is already moving something in your heart, if you already feel the tears wanting to come, don't stop them, because what's coming is even stronger. And if this story is helping you, consider supporting this channel. Your support allows stories like this to reach more people who need to hear them. Olivia spent another week observing. Every day at 4 o'clock, Hope would enter Grandma Carol's room with her old book. Every day. Grandma Carol would sit in bed with bright eyes. Every day. The words flowed a little more. And Olivia started to notice something else. Something she had ignored for 4 years. Her mother was happy. Not happy the way she was before the stroke. Not happy singing and reciting poetry, but happy in a new way. Happy to have something to look forward to. Happy to have a human connection. Happy that someone would sit with her and give her time and patience and love. Hope hadn't given Grandma Carol back her voice. She had given her back something more important. She had given her back hope, and hope, sometimes, can perform miracles that medicine can't explain. But the question that haunted Olivia was another. Why? Why would a housekeeper dedicate her lunch hour to reading stories to an elderly woman who was nothing to her? Why would she bring a book from her own house, a book that was clearly a family treasure? Why would she get up an hour earlier each day to write down in a notebook the words that Grandma Carol was trying to say? Olivia needed to know, and finally, after 2 weeks of observation, she dared to ask. It was a Sunday afternoon. Grandma Carol was napping. Olivia found Hope in the kitchen, washing the lunch dishes. Hope, Olivia said, I need to talk to you. Hope dried her hands on her apron and turned around. Her eyes showed concern. She probably thought she had done something wrong. You're not in trouble, Olivia clarified. I just want to ask you something. Hope nodded, still tense. Olivia took a deep breath. I know about the stories, she said. I know what you do every afternoon at 4. I've been watching. And I've seen the notebook where you write down your mother's progress. Hope paled. Her hands began to tremble. Ma'am, I can explain. I didn't want to interfere. I just saw Grandma Carol so sad, so alone, and Olivia raised her hand to stop her. I said, I'm not angry, she said. I don't know what I am. Confused, grateful. ashamed, all at the same time. Hope looked at her without understanding. Olivia sat down in a kitchen chair. Suddenly, she felt very tired. The best doctors in the world told me that my mother would never speak again, she said. I spent a fortune on treatments. And you, with an old book and your lunch hour, achieved what no one else could. Hope lowered her gaze. I didn't do anything special, Mom, she said. I just read her stories. My grandmother taught me that stories have power, that they can heal what medicine can't. Olivia felt the tears wanting to come. Why? She asked. Why do you dedicate your free time to my mother? I don't pay you for that. It's not your job. Why do you do it? Hope remained silent for a long moment. She looked out the window. She looked at the sky that was beginning to turn orange with the sunset. And when she finally spoke, her voice trembled. Because my mother also had a stroke, she said. 20 years ago, in our small town, there weren't good hospitals. There weren't specialists. There was nothing. Olivia felt her heart shrink. Hope continued. My mom was like Grandma Carol. She loved to talk. She loved to sing. She loved to tell jokes at family gatherings. She was the voice of our house. And after the stroke, she fell silent. And what happened? Olivia asked in a soft voice. Hope looked at her with moist eyes. She died, she said, 3 weeks later, without being able to say a single word, without being able to say goodbye, without being able to tell us she loved us one last time. Hope paused. She took a deep breath. Tears were falling down her cheeks, but her voice remained firm. The last thing my mother did was take my hand, she continued. She looked me in the eyes, and I could see that she wanted to tell me something important, but her mouth opened, and nothing came out, just silence, a silence so great that I still hear it in my nightmares. Olivia felt her heart breaking into pieces. My mother died with the words trapped inside, Hope said. She died without being able to say goodbye, without being able to say, I love you, without being able to say the things that mothers say to their children. And I was left with the silence, with the doubt of what she wanted to tell me, with the guilt of not having found a way to help her. The silence that followed was so heavy that Olivia could feel it pressing on her chest. I was 32 years old, Hope continued, and I carried that guilt for 20 years. The guilt of not having found a way to help her. The guilt of not having looked for more options. The guilt of having let her die in silence. Olivia didn't know what to say. She just stood there, listening, with tears falling down her cheeks. Hope wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. She looked at Olivia directly. For 20 years, I looked for a way to redeem myself, she said. I worked in the homes of wealthy families. I took care of children. I cleaned floors, but always with that emptiness inside, always with the feeling that she should have done more for her mother, always wondering what would have happened if she had found a way to help her speak. When I came to this house, Hope said, and saw Grandma Carol, I saw my mom. I saw the same frustration. I saw the same pain. I saw the same loneliness of someone who has so much to say, but can't. And you decided to help her, Olivia said. I decided to try, Hope corrected. I didn't know if it would work. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a therapist. I'm just a woman who knows how to tell stories, because her grandma taught her. But I thought that if the stories couldn't help, at least they wouldn't hurt. And if they could help, maybe I could give Grandma Carol what I couldn't give my mom. Olivia rose from her chair, walked towards Hope, and hugged her. She hugged her like she had never hugged an employee before. She hugged her like you hug someone who has saved your life. She hugged her like you hug someone who understands the pain of losing a mother. In that hug, there was more than gratitude. There was recognition. There were two women who had suffered in different ways, but were connected. One had lost her mother completely. The other had lost her mother's voice while she was still alive. Both knew the silence. Both knew the pain of unspoken words. Hope cried on her shoulder for 5 minutes, cried with sobs that came from the depths of her being, cried for her mother, who died without speaking, cried for 20 years of guilt, cried for the joy of finally finding a way to redeem herself. And Olivia let her cry, because she understood that those tears were for 20 years. They were the liberation of a guilt that Hope had carried alone for 2 decades. When they parted, Olivia looked her in the eyes. "Thank you," she said, "for giving my mother a voice, for giving her hope, for doing what I couldn't do." Hope shook her head. "You don't have to thank me, ma'am. Grandma Carol is special. She deserves someone to read her stories. She deserves someone to have patience with her. She deserves someone to believe that she can speak again." Olivia felt those words like a punch to the chest, because she hadn't believed. She had listened to the doctors and had lost faith. She had stopped trying. She had abandoned her mother without even realizing it. And Hope, a housekeeper earning minimum wage, had had more faith than she had. What would you do in Olivia's place? What would you do if you discovered that an employee was giving everything she had to save your mother? What would you do if you knew that she was doing this, not for money, not for recognition, but because she had been searching for redemption for 20 years? If you haven't felt anything yet, check if you have a pulse, because what's coming is the moment that changed everything. That night, Olivia did something that she hadn't done in 4 years. She went to her mother's room. She sat beside her bed. She took Grandma Carol's wrinkled hand in her own and read her a story. The room was dimly lit. Only a night lamp illuminated the space with a soft, warm light. Grandma Carol was lying down, her eyes closed, her breathing even. Olivia thought that maybe she was asleep, thought that maybe she should wait until tomorrow, but something compelled her to stay. Something told her that this moment was important, that she couldn't wait even a second longer. She didn't know which book to choose. She didn't know which story would work. So she grabbed the first book she found on Grandma Carol's bookshelf. It was a book of poetry, a book of Robert Frost. Olivia began to read. Her voice trembled. She wasn't used to reading aloud. She felt clumsy, uncomfortable, exposed. But when she looked at her mother, she saw something that she hadn't seen in years. Grandma Carol's eyes were open, bright, attentive, and a small smile on her lips. Olivia continued reading, poem after poem, verse after verse. And as she read, she felt something healing inside her, something that had been broken since the day of the stroke. And then, after 20 minutes of reading, something extraordinary happened. Grandma Carol reached out her hand, took Olivia's hand, and said one word, daughter. One single word. But that word was worth more than all the books that Olivia had sold in her life. That word was proof that her mother was still there, that she recognized her, that she loved her. Olivia cried like she hadn't cried since her father's funeral, cried with sobs that shook her whole body, cried for 4 years of silence, cried for 4 years of distance, cried for 4 years of running from the pain instead of facing it, cried for all the 10-minute visits, cried for all the times she said, "I'm busy," cried for all the lost opportunities to sit beside her mother and simply be present. The tears soaked Grandma Carol's sheets, soaked the Robert Frost book that had fallen to the floor, soaked the intertwined hands of mother and daughter, and Grandma Carol, with her trembling hand, stroked her hair like she used to do when Olivia was a child, like she used to do before the stroke, stole everything from her. "Don't cry," Grandma Carol tried to say. The word didn't come out complete. It came out like, don't, but Olivia understood every broken syllable, understood every frustrated attempt, understood that her mother was telling her that everything was okay. And for the first time in 4 years, Olivia believed that maybe it was. From that night on, Olivia changed her routine. She no longer came home late. She no longer avoided her mother's room. She no longer ran from the pain. Now, every night at 8, she sat beside Grandma Carol and read to her. Sometimes poetry, sometimes short stories, sometimes novels that she had loved in her youth. And Grandma Carol listened attentively, trying to repeat phrases, trying to find the words that the stroke had taken from her. And hope continued with her 4 o'clock ritual. The two women, without coordinating, had created a system of double stimulation, stories in the afternoon, readings at night. 2 different voices, but the same goal, to awaken Grandma Carol's sleeping voice. The results were astonishing. 3 weeks after the encounter in the kitchen, Grandma Carol said her first 5-word sentence. It was during Hope's session. They were reading a story about a small-town teacher who taught poor children to read. And when Hope finished a particularly emotional chapter, Grandma Carol said, "I was a teacher too." 5 words, spoken with effort, with pauses, but spoken, and most importantly, they were her own words. She wasn't repeating what Hope was reading. She was expressing a memory. She was connecting the story with her own life. Hope screamed with joy, ran to find Olivia. The 2 women returned to the room and found Grandma Carol with an enormous smile, her eyes shining with pride. That night, Olivia wrote in her diary, "Mom said she was a teacher, not as a piece of information, but as a declaration of identity, as if she were remembering who she was, as if she were becoming herself again." And that was exactly what was happening. The stories weren't just stimulating Grandma Carol's language center. They were reconnecting her with her past, with her identity, with the person she was before the stroke robbed her of everything. Each story was a bridge between silence and words, a bridge between the present and the past, a bridge between the illness and the person. And Hope had built that bridge with nothing more than an old book and infinite patience. A month later, something even more extraordinary happened. Olivia had invited Grandma Carol's neurologist for a routine checkup. She wasn't expecting anything new. She just wanted to make sure her mother was stable. The neurologist did his usual exams. He checked her reflexes, looked at her pupils, asked simple questions. And then, when he asked Grandma Carol how she felt, something happened. Grandma Carol looked him straight in the eyes, took a deep breath, and said, with a clarity that no one expected, "I feel better since I've been hearing stories." 10 words, a complete sentence with a subject, a verb, and object, a coherent expression of a complex feeling. The neurologist was speechless, literally speechless. He looked at Olivia, looked at Grandma Carol, looked at his notes from 4 years ago, where he had written, "Probability of speech recovery, less than 3%. He took off his glasses, cleaned them with his coat, put them back on, as if he couldn't believe what he was seeing, as if he needed to make sure he wasn't dreaming. "What's going on here?" he asked. Olivia smiled. "Stories, doctor. We're reading her stories." The neurologist frowned. "Stories?" Olivia nodded. "Our housekeeper, Hope, started 6 months ago. She reads her folk tales every day at 4 in the afternoon, and I read her poetry and novels every night. It's not formal therapy, just stories." The neurologist was silent for a long moment. Then he looked at Grandma Carol with new eyes. "Mrs. Carol," he said, "can you tell me the name of any character from the stories we have read to you?" Grandma Carol thought for a few seconds, and then she said, "The fisherman, and from the story of the mermaid. His name was... She stopped, frowned. She was searching for the word. Olivia could see the effort on her face. And then, after 10 seconds of struggle, the word came out. His name was Rodrigo. The neurologist wrote something in his notebook. Then he looked at Olivia. "This is extraordinary," he said. "I have no other word. Your mother's recovery goes against everything that science predicted." "It's a miracle," said Olivia. The neurologist shook his head. "It's not a miracle," he said. "It's neuroplasticity. The brain has the ability to reconnect, to create new pathways when the old ones are damaged. But it needs stimulation. And apparently, the stories are providing exactly the type of stimulation that your mother's brain needs." Olivia thought of Hope, of her old book, of her lunch hour dedicated to an elderly woman who was nothing to her. "So it works," said Olivia. "Reading her stories really works." The neurologist nodded. "I can't guarantee a full recovery. Broca's aphasia is complex. But I can say that your mother has progressed more in 6 months with stories than in 3 years with traditional therapy." Olivia felt the tears wanting to come out again. "Why didn't anyone tell us this before?" she asked. "Why didn't any specialist recommend something so simple?" The neurologist sighed. "Because medicine sometimes focuses so much on the technical that it forgets the human," he said. "Stories aren't an approved therapy. There are no clinical studies, no protocols. But that doesn't mean they don't work. Sometimes what the soul needs is as important as what the brain needs. And your mother needed stories." The neurologist got up, walked to the window, looked at the rose garden that Grandma Carol had planted 30 years ago. "I've spent 30 years of my career studying the brain," he said without turning around. "I've published hundreds of articles on neurology. I've treated thousands of patients with aphasia. And never in all those years did I see a recovery like this." He turned to look at Olivia. "Your housekeeper, without any degree, without any medical training, discovered something that we all ignored, that the brain doesn't just need exercises and medications. It needs connection, it needs emotion, it needs stories." That night, Olivia told Hope everything. She told her what the neurologist had said. She told her about neuroplasticity. She told her that the stories were literally reconnecting Grandma Carol's brain. Hope listened in silence. And when Olivia finished, she said something that Olivia would never forget. "My grandmother always said that stories are medicine for the soul. Now I know they're also medicine for the brain." Some people are going to pause this video here. They're going to say it's too much, that they can't process so many emotions. And that's okay. Breathe. Take a moment. But I promise you what comes next is worth it, because I still haven't told you what happened the day that Grandma Carol said the phrase that changed everything. It was a Thursday in November. Hope was reading a new story, a story she hadn't read before. She had found it at the bottom of her memory chest, a tale that her grandmother had written by hand 50 years ago. It was the story of a woman who lost her voice because of an evil witch. For years, the woman walked the world in silence, looking for a way to recover what she had lost. And in the end, after many adventures, she discovered that her voice wasn't lost. It was kept in the stories that others told about her. Every time someone remembered her words, every time someone repeated something she had said, her voice came back into existence. Hope read the story in her soft and melodic voice. Grandma Carol listened with her eyes closed, a small smile on her lips. And when Hope reached the end, when the woman in the story finally recovered her voice by listening to her daughter tell her stories, something extraordinary happened. Grandma Carol opened her eyes, looked at Hope directly, and said, with a clarity that neither of them expected, "I want to hear the end of the story." Hope froze. That wasn't a repeated phrase. It wasn't something she had read. It was an original request, an expression of desire, a testament to the fact that Grandma Carol's brain was functioning in ways that no one had anticipated. But it wasn't just the sentence that made Hope start to cry. It was what Grandma Carol said next, with effort, with pauses, with tears streaming down her wrinkled cheeks. Grandma Carol spoke 7 more words. "Thank you for giving me my voice." Hope. Hope dropped the book. It fell to the floor, and she embraced Grandma Carol with all her strength. The two women wept together for 10 minutes. One cried with gratitude, the other cried with redemption. One had recovered her voice. The other had found forgiveness for not being able to save her own mother. Olivia came home an hour later. She found Hope in the kitchen, her eyes red but wearing an enormous smile. "What happened?" Olivia asked. Her mother spoke, Hope said. She really spoke. Not just repeating, she spoke. Olivia rushed to Grandma Carol's room. She found her awake, with Hope's book of stories in her hands. "Mom," Olivia said. Grandma Carol looked at her, and in a voice clearer than anything Olivia had heard in 4 years, she said, "Daughter, I have a story to tell you." Olivia felt the ground vanish beneath her feet. She sat on the bed beside her mother, took her hands, and listened. What Grandma Carol told her that afternoon wasn't a story from a book. It was her own story. The story of how she met Olivia's father in a library. The story of how they fell in love reading poetry together. The story of how Olivia was conceived after a night reading Robert Frost under the stars. The words came out slowly, fragmented. Sometimes Grandma Carol paused, searching for the right word. Sometimes she had to start again. But the words came, and each one of them was a miracle. Olivia listened for 2 hours. She cried for 2 hours, and when Grandma Carol finally fell asleep, exhausted from the effort of talking so much, Olivia stayed sitting beside her, holding her hand, promising herself that she would never stop listening again. That night, Olivia wrote an email to her neurologist. She told him everything that had happened. She told him the sentences that Grandma Carol had said. She told him the story of the library and Robert Frost and the stars. The neurologist replied the next day, "Ms. Sterling, this is a case for publication. With your permission, I would like to document your mother's recovery. What is happening could help thousands of patients with aphasia around the world." Olivia agreed. And 3 months later, Grandma Carol's case was published in a medical journal. The title of the article was "Narrative Therapy in Broca's Aphasia, a Case Study on the Power of Stories." The article mentioned Hope. It called her the unintentional creator of a revolutionary therapeutic protocol, a woman without formal education in medicine who had achieved what years of conventional therapy could not. Hope read the article with tears in her eyes. She didn't understand all the scientific words. She didn't understand the medical terms, but she understood one thing. She had helped. Her stories had helped. Her grandmother's love, transmitted through an old book, had crossed generations to heal someone she never knew, and that was all Hope needed to know. But the impact of the article went beyond what anyone expected. Other hospitals began to contact Olivia. Other neurologists wanted to know more about the method. Other patients with aphasia wanted to try the stories. Olivia organized a meeting. She invited Hope to speak. The housekeeper, who had never spoken in public, stood before 50 doctors and therapists and told them about her method. "It's not complicated," Hope said in a trembling voice. "Just read. Read stories you like. Read with patience. Read without expecting results. Read because the stories deserve to be told, not because you expect a miracle. And sometimes, without looking for it, the miracle arrives." Hope paused. She looked at the 50 doctors who were watching her attentively. None of them had expected to receive a lesson from a housekeeper, but they were all taking notes. "My grandmother taught me that every story has a soul," Hope continued. "And when we tell a story with love, that soul passes from us to the listener. Maybe that is what heals. Not the words themselves, but the love with which we say them." A doctor raised his hand. He was an older man with grey hair at his temples and a skeptical look. "Ms. Miller," he said, "you mention love as a healing factor. But how can we include love in a medical protocol? How can we measure it? How can we replicate it?" Hope looked at him directly. "You can't," she said. Love cannot be measured or replicated. It can only be given. And if doctors cannot give love to their patients, then find someone who can. Find the grandmothers, the mothers, the housekeepers, anyone who knows how to tell stories with their heart. The silence that followed was long. No one knew what to say. No one expected a woman without formal education to say something so profound. The doctors took notes. They asked questions. They requested copies of Hope's grandmother's storybook. And 6 months later, the first hospital in the United States inaugurated a narrative therapy program for patients with aphasia. They called it the Hope Program. Olivia funded the program. She donated books from her bookstore chain. She hired volunteer readers. She created a system where patients with aphasia received stories every day, just like Grandma Carol received them from Hope. And the results were astonishing. Not all patients improved like Grandma Carol. Aphasia is complex, and every brain is different, but many improved. Some said their first words in years. Others reconnected with lost memories. Others simply found peace in listening to stories, even if they couldn't respond. There was one case in particular that became famous. A 65-year-old man named Robert who had lost his speech after a car accident. He hadn't said anything for 3 years. His wife read him the newspaper every day, but there was never a response. When he joined the Hope program, he was assigned a volunteer who loved adventure stories. She read him stories of pirates and hidden treasures, and after 2 months, Robert said his first word in 3 years. The word was ship. His wife cried for an hour. The doctors couldn't believe it, and Robert, with an enormous smile, asked for more pirate stories. And it all began with a housekeeper, missing her deceased mother, and an old book inherited from her grandmother. 8 months have passed since Hope started reading to Grandma Carol. Grandma Carol is now 79 years old. She still has aphasia. She's still struggling to find the words. She still needs long pauses between phrases, but she speaks. Not like before the stroke. Not with the fluency of the literature professor that she was for 40 years, but she speaks. She says, "I love you." She says, "I'm hungry." She says, "Tell me a story." And that for Olivia is more than enough. Hope is no longer a housekeeper. Olivia promoted her to Grandma Carol's official companion, gave her a raise that Hope tried to refuse 3 times, gave her a larger room overlooking the garden, gave her paid vacations and health insurance and everything an employee never receives. But the most important thing that Olivia gave her was not material. It was gratitude. It was respect. It was the recognition that a woman with an old book had done more for her family than all the millions she possessed. It was treating her like family, not as an employee. It was inviting her to the table, at dinners. It was including her in family photos. It was calling her by her name with affection, not with the coldness of a boss. Hope, for the first time in her life, felt like she belonged somewhere. After 20 years of working in other people's homes, of being invisible to the families who employed her, of always feeling like a stranger, she finally had a home. Not because Olivia gave her a larger room, but because she gave her love. Hope still reads to Grandma Carol every day at 4 in the afternoon. She now has an entire library at her disposal and courtesy of Olivia, but her favorite book remains the same. Her grandmother's book of fairy tales, the book that crossed generations, to heal. And Olivia still reads to her mother every night at 8. Now they read together. Olivia reads a paragraph. Grandma Carol tries to repeat it. Sometimes she succeeds, sometimes she doesn't, but they always laugh. They always cry. They always hug at the end. Sometimes the grandchildren join the reading sessions. Olivia's children, who at first didn't understand why their grandmother couldn't speak, now read stories to her. They watch her attempt the words. They see her smile. When she succeeds, they see her cry with happiness. when a phrase comes out complete. And so, unintentionally, Grandma Carol is teaching a new generation the power of stories. She's planting seeds that will blossom many years later. She's creating a legacy that cannot be measured in money. Mother and daughter, reunited by stories, connected by words, healed by love. This story shouldn't exist. There shouldn't be a housekeeper who uses her lunch hour to read stories to her boss's mother. There shouldn't be an elderly woman with aphasia who regains her speech thanks to folk tales. There shouldn't be a millionaire who learns to love by watching an employee do what she couldn't. But it does exist because the world, despite all the bad, still has people like Hope. People who tell stories, people who believe in the power of words, people who give voice to those who have lost it. And if you're listening to this, if you've made it this far, I want you to do something. Think of someone who has lost their voice, not necessarily through illness, perhaps through fear, perhaps through shame, perhaps through loneliness, maybe simply because no one listens to them and tell them a story. It doesn't have to be a famous story. It doesn't have to be an expensive book. It can be the story of your day, the story of your childhood, the story of how you met your best friend, because stories are bridges, bridges between people, bridges between generations, bridges between silence and words, and maybe, just maybe, your story is the bridge someone needs to find their voice. The last time I saw Grandma Carol, it was in a video that Olivia posted on her social media. It was Grandma Carol's 80th birthday. There was a 3-layer cake decorated with sugar roses. There were gold balloons that read 80 years. There was the whole family gathered, children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, former students who had traveled from other cities just to see her, university colleagues who hadn't forgotten her. The room was full of love, full of laughter, full of shared memories, and in the center of it all, sitting in her favorite chair, was Grandma Carol, 80 years old, with aphasia, but also with a smile that lit up the entire room. And Grandma Carol, with Hope's grandmother's book of fairy tales in her hands, did something that no one expected. She told a story. It wasn't a long story. It wasn't a perfect story. It was a story with pauses and silences and words searched for during eternal seconds, but it was her story. The story of how a housekeeper had gave her back her voice. The story of how stories saved her. The story of how love can do what medicine cannot. And at the end of the story, Grandma Carol looked at the camera. Her eyes sparkled with tears. Her voice trembled, but it was firm. And she said something that made me cry. She said, "Stories never die, and as long as there is someone to tell them, neither do we." Then she looked at Hope, who was sitting beside her, with moist eyes, and added 3 more words. "Thank you, my Hope." Hope hugged her. Olivia hugged them both. And in that 3-minute video, you could see 3 generations of women embracing each other, 3 generations connected by stories, 3 generations who had found salvation in words. You have 2 choices now. You can close this video and forget what you heard. Go on with your day, do what you had to do, or you can do something different. You can call someone who needs to hear your voice. You can tell a story to someone who has forgotten theirs. You can be, even for a moment, like Hope, because the world doesn't need more doctors or more therapies or more expensive treatments. The world needs more people who tell stories, word by word, phrase by phrase, story by story, with patience, with love, with hope, like we all should be. And if this story moved you, if you feel that something changed inside you, don't keep that feeling to yourself. Share it. Tell it to someone. Leave a comment. telling your own story of someone who gave you back your voice when you had lost it. Because stories like this deserve to be told, and people like Hope deserve to be remembered. Thank you for listening until the end. And remember, stories never die, and as long as there's someone to tell them, neither do we. That's all Grandma Carol wanted to say, and it's all we need to learn. An 80-year-old woman with aphasia taught us something that all the self-help books can't. That words matter, that stories heal, that love, when expressed with patience, can work miracles. And a 52-year-old housekeeper taught us something even more important, that redemption is possible, that it's never too late to heal the wounds of the past, that sometimes helping others is the best way to help ourselves. This isn't just the story of Grandma Carol, it's the story of hope. It's the story of Olivia. It's the story of all the people who have lost their voice, and of all those who fight to give it back to them. And now, it's your story too, because you listened, because you made it this far, because you let these words enter your heart. And the stories that enter our heart never leave us. They stay with us. They change us. They make us better. Like Hope changed Grandma Carol, like Grandma Carol changed Olivia, like this story, I hope, changed you. Stories never die, and as long as there's someone to tell them, neither do we.